On a white morning in Bend, Oregon, a starving German shepherd ran from door to door, begging strangers to follow her into the storm. Most people turned away, but one former Navy SEAL saw the command in her eyes, stepped into the snow, and found 3 tiny lives waiting beneath a forgotten camp. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment telling us the city or country you're listening from. Let this little circle of kindness travel from one heart to another. Snow came down over Bend, Oregon before sunrise. Soft at first, then hard enough to blur the streetlights along Galveston Avenue into pale circles. By 7 in the morning, the wind off the Cascades had sharpened, and the town moved with that tense, practical rhythm that winter gives to people who know better than to argue with it. Pickup trucks crawled past the curbs with chains clicking over ice. Coffee shop windows steamed from the inside. A city plow groaned at the corner, pushing a gray ridge of slush toward a storm drain that had already given up. People hurried with their heads bent, collars raised, hands tucked deep in pockets. Nobody wanted to be outside unless they had a reason. The German shepherd had a reason. She came around the corner near the hardware store with snow clinging to her sable coat and a strip of frost gathered along her whiskers. She was large, or had been once, but hunger had cut narrow shadows along her ribs. A black saddle marked her back, dark and wet beneath the falling snow. And one ear stood sharp, while the other carried a small torn edge that gave her a lopsided, battle-worn look. Her amber eyes scanned the sidewalk with a kind of fierce intelligence that should have stopped people. It did not. She ran to a man loading salt bags into his truck and barked twice, sharp but not threatening. Then she spun, trotted 5 steps away, and looked back. The man waved a gloved hand. "Go on, get." She tried again with a woman outside the bakery, lowering her head, tail low, voice rough from cold. The woman clutched her paper bag to her chest and stepped inside fast enough to make the bell over the door scream. A teenager in a red ski jacket laughed and tossed a snowball that burst against the curb near the dog's front paws. She flinched, but she did not run far. That was the thing nobody noticed. A frightened stray runs away. This dog kept returning. She crossed the street, slipped once on the ice, recovered, and planted herself outside Miller's Griddle, a narrow diner with fogged windows and yellow light spilling across the sidewalk. Inside, June Miller stood behind the counter with a towel in one hand and a coffee pot in the other. June was 68, square-shouldered, silver-haired, and built out of equal parts kindness and impatience. She had owned the place long enough to know every regular by the sound of his boots. She also knew when a town was pretending not to see something. The shepherd barked once at the door, then looked down the street, then back again. June sighed. "Lord, girl, what are you trying to say?" The dog vanished into the snow before June could do anything useful. At a table near the window, Deputy Mark Ellis looked up from his eggs. He was in his late 40s, broad in the chest with tired eyes and a tan sheriff's jacket thrown over the back of his chair. 3 days earlier, he had answered a call about a German shepherd running near the old logging road north of town. He had found paw prints, heard barking in the timber, and decided the animal was likely feral or lost. There had been no bite report, no injured person, no immediate emergency. He had cleared the call. Now the same dog was running down Galveston Avenue like the world had caught fire behind her. Mark set his fork down. Something in his stomach tightened, but he told himself he would check after breakfast. It was a small lie, the kind a tired man makes when the weather is bad and the paperwork is worse. The bell over the diner door rang and cold air swept in. Nathan Pierce stepped inside with snow on his shoulders and winter in his face. He was 39, tall and broad-shouldered, with a lean strength that did not ask to be noticed. His sand-brown hair was cut short, almost military neat, and a thin scar crossed the left eyebrow above eyes the green of pine needles under rain. He wore an olive thermal shirt beneath a charcoal field jacket, black cargo pants, tan boots scuffed white at the edges, and an old steel watch that looked as if it had survived more weather than most buildings. People in Bend knew pieces of him. Former Navy SEAL, lived alone in a cabin near Deschutes National Forest, came into town for coffee, feed nails, stove parts, and very little conversation. June knew more than most, though not because Nathan had told her. Small towns collect silence the way trees collect snow. "Morning, Nathan," June said. "Roads are turning mean." "They were born mean," Nathan said, brushing snow from his sleeve. It was the closest thing to a joke she had heard from him all month. June poured coffee into a paper cup and nodded toward the window. "You see that shepherd out there?" Nathan turned. The dog stood across the street in front of the closed bike shop, chest-heaving body angled toward the north road. She saw him looking. She froze. For a few seconds, man and dog regarded each other through a curtain of snow. Then she barked once, pivoted, ran 6 steps, and stopped to look back. Nathan did not move at first. His eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but recognition. Years before, in a country where the air tasted of dust and copper, he had watched working dogs do almost the same thing. Move forward, check the handler, return if needed, lead without words. His hand tightened around the coffee cup until the lid flexed. June studied him. "That means something to you?" Nathan set the cup on the counter. "She's not begging." Mark Ellis looked over from his table. "She's been around a few days, probably hungry." Nathan's gaze stayed on the dog. She barked again, then took 2 steps toward the street, paws skidding. "No," he said quietly. "She's asking." June's mouth softened. "Asking for what?" The radio above the pie case crackled before Nathan could answer. A weather alert broke through the old speaker. Warning of heavy snow falling. Temperatures and wind gusts strong enough to shut down county roads by noon. Several people in the diner groaned. Someone muttered about tourists in rental cars. Outside, the shepherd stood with her head lowered against the wind, watching only Nathan. He opened the diner door. The cold hit him full in the face, clean and bitter, carrying the smell of snow diesel and pine. Instead of walking straight toward the dog, he crouched with his body turned slightly aside and lowered one hand, palm open. The shepherd did not approach. She did not need comfort. Her eyes moved from his hand to his face, and something passed between them that made June stop wiping the counter. Not trust. Not yet. A decision. The dog barked once, hoarse and urgent, and ran north. 5 steps. 10. She stopped and looked back. Nathan stood. Mark came to the doorway behind him, one hand resting on the frame. "Pierce storm's coming in hard." Nathan glanced once toward the white sky over the roofs, then toward the dog. "Then we should hurry." He moved to his truck, pulled a pack from behind the seat and slung it over one shoulder. June hurried outside, wrapping her cardigan tight. "You want backup?" Nathan checked the small flashlight clipped to his jacket and the folding blanket in his pack. "Call Dr. Kim. Tell her to keep her phone close." June swallowed. The humor left her face. "Nathan." He looked at her then, and for a brief moment the distance in his eyes cracked enough for something older to show through. Grief, maybe. Or memory. Dogs do not lead like that, unless something is waiting. The shepherd barked again, almost furious now, as if the humans were wasting the last good minutes the morning had left. Nathan stepped off the curb and followed her down the whitening street. Behind him, Mark stood under the diner awning, still as a man listening to a warning he had ignored once already. June whispered a prayer too soft for anyone to hear. The town blurred behind Nathan with every step. The dog reached the end of the block, turned toward the north road, and vanished into a gust of snow so thick it looked like the forest had opened its mouth. Nathan followed her into it. The road north of Bend narrowed under the storm-trading storefronts and sidewalks for ponderosa pines, frozen ditches, and the long white shoulders of Deschutes National Forest. Snow swept sideways across the old logging road in thin, stinging sheets, and the German Shepherd moved through it with the desperate focus of a creature running on something deeper than strength. Nathan kept 20 yards behind her at first. Not because he could not keep up, but because a panicked animal needs space the way a frightened person needs air. His boots punched through crusted snow at the road's edge. The wind pressed against his ears until the world became breath, footfall, bark, breath again. Sage, though he did not know her name yet, ran ahead, stopped beside a bent road marker and looked back. Her ribs lifted and fell beneath her wet coat. Then she pressed on. There was no wandering in her path. She crossed the road where a gap in the guardrail opened onto a service trail, followed the buried track uphill, and paused at every fork just long enough to make sure Nathan chose the right way. He had seen that rhythm before. Advance, confirm, lead. It brought back a flash of heat from another continent, a handler's low whistle, Atlas moving ahead through dust with his nose low and his body certain. Nathan pushed the memory aside so hard it left a taste like metal in his mouth. Not now. The storm thickened as the trees closed around them. Branches bent under snow and dropped cold powder down the back of Nathan's collar. Once, Sage slipped on a hidden patch of ice and went down hard on one shoulder. Nathan took 2 quick steps toward her. She scrambled up before he reached her, shaking snow from her coat with an irritated snap of her head, then limped 3 strides and forced herself into a trot. "Easy," Nathan called, though the wind stole most of the word. The dog flicked her torn ear but did not slow. They climbed through a stand of pines and came to a clearing where the land dipped toward a cluster of old buildings half swallowed by drifts. The sign at the entrance leaned at a crooked angle, its paint peeled and its lower half buried. Nathan brushed snow away with a gloved hand. Hawthorne Outdoor School. Beneath the name, faded letters promised summer trails, safe cabins, and learning under open skies. The place looked as if the sky had forgotten that promise. A dining hall sagged in the center of the clearing, its porch roof bowed from years of snow. 2 small bunkhouses stood behind it with plywood over most windows, though several boards had broken loose and clapped softly in the wind. A flagpole rose near the path, their rope tapping against metal with a lonely little tick. Sage did not hesitate. She crossed the clearing toward the dining hall, pushed through a gap where the door hung loose and disappeared inside. Nathan stopped at the threshold. Training did not vanish because a storm had feelings. He listened. The building creaked around him. Snow hissed through a broken pane. No human voices, no engine, no fresh smoke. He drew the flashlight from his jacket and clicked it on. The beam cut across warped floorboards, overturned benches, mouse-chewed posters, and the gray ribs of an old piano against one wall. "Sage?" he said, though he still did not know the name that would belong to the shape in his mind. A low sound answered from the far corner. Not a growl, a pleading rumble. Nathan stepped inside, slow and angled, letting the dog see his hands. The floor smelled of old wood mildew, cold ashes, and the sour trace of animal fear. Sage stood near a collapsed serving counter, her front paws planted on either side of a torn wool blanket. She looked at Nathan, then down. He followed her gaze. At first, the bundle seemed like another piece of trash in the abandoned room. Then it moved. Barely. A small black and tan head lifted from the fold of cloth, no larger than Nathan's palm, and dropped again, as if the effort had spent everything left in the world. Nathan crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to one knee. 3 puppies lay pressed together under the blanket. German shepherds, maybe 8 weeks old, their coats damp in patches, their bodies so cold that the warmth seemed to have become a memory. The largest one, a male with a dark stripe down his nose, blinked at Nathan and gave a faint, stubborn grunt. "You are a ranger, aren't you?" Nathan whispered before he could stop himself. The second pup, a little female with softer tan markings over her eyes, trembled so hard her tiny teeth clicked. The third was half hidden beneath the others. He was the smallest, black along the back, with pale tan feet and a white fleck under his chin. His chest rose so shallowly Nathan had to lean close to see it. His hands went still. The old calm tried to come over him, the one he used when the noise got bad and the orders got simple. Assess, warmth, airway, transport. He unzipped his jacket and pulled the folding blanket from his pack. Sage watched every movement with wild attention. When he reached for the first puppy, her body stiffened. Nathan stopped. He laid his hand flat on the floorboards, palm down, and waited. "I know," he said softly. "I know you brought me here. Let me help." Sage's nose twitched. She stepped close enough to smell his sleeve, taking in coffee, smoke, truck, vinyl, cold metal, and whatever grief lived in a man long enough to become part of his scent. Then she backed away one step. Permission thin as thread, but real. Nathan lifted the largest pup and tucked him inside his jacket against his base layer. The puppy's cold body made his skin flinch. The little female came next, wrapped in the inner fold of blanket. The smallest made no sound when Nathan touched him. That was worse than crying. Nathan slipped him carefully against his chest under one hand and felt for the faint tap of a heart. There. Too slow, but there. "Stay with me," he murmured. His voice came out rough. Sage moved beside him, nudging the torn blanket as if trying to gather anything he had missed. That was when Nathan noticed the arrangement. The blanket was not random. It had been tucked around the puppies in layers, weighted with old shirts, insulation scraps, even a strip of foam dragged from a seat cushion. Sage had built a fortress out of ruin. He pictured her leaving this place, hungry, running into town, being pushed away, then returning to curl herself around 3 fading sparks through another night. The thought lodged behind his ribs. He stood carefully, one arm tight against the puppies under his jacket. "We are leaving." Sage turned toward the door at once, but Nathan's flashlight swept the floor one more time. The beam snagged on marks near the counter. Boot prints, fresh enough that their edges had not softened under dust. They led from the back entrance to the corner, then away again. Beside the prints lay 2 things that did not belong to years of abandonment. A torn plastic bag labeled puppy food, and a small metal bowl with a skin of ice across the bottom. Nathan's jaw tightened. Someone had been here. Someone had known. Sage gave a sharp, impatient bark from the doorway, and the smallest puppy shifted under Nathan's hand, a fragile twitch. The mystery would wait. Breath came first. Nathan stepped back into the storm with 3 puppies hidden against his chest and a mother dog pressed close to his leg. The clearing had almost disappeared behind falling snow. Their tracks from the way in were already fading. Halfway across the yard, Sage stopped and looked back at the dining hall. The wind pulled at her coat. For a moment she stood like a statue carved from worry, staring at the place that had nearly become a grave. Then she turned toward Nathan and brushed her shoulder against his knee. Not affection. Not yet. A report delivered in silence. "I did my part. Now do yours." Nathan looked down at her. "Understood." They started toward the trees. Behind them, inside Hawthorne Camp, the loose rope on the flagpole tapped and tapped in the storm, and under the snow near the back door, one fresh tire track began filling white. By the time Nathan reached his cabin outside Bend, the storm had closed the forest road behind him and turned the pines into dark smudges behind a wall of white. The cabin sat above a frozen bend in the Deschutes River, small, square, and stubborn, with smoke stains on the chimney stones and a porch that groaned under fresh snow. For 3 years, it had been quiet enough for a man to hear his own ghosts moving around at night. That afternoon, quiet broke at the door. Nathan shouldered inside with the puppies tucked against his chest and Sage close enough to crowd his boots. The cabin smelled of pine boards, cold ashes, old coffee, and machine oil from the tools stacked neatly near the wall. He kicked the door shut against the wind and crossed straight to the iron stove. "Hold on," he said, though he was not sure which living thing needed the words most. He set the puppies on a folded wool blanket only long enough to feed dry kindling into the stove. His hands moved fast, practiced, but the small sounds behind him kept cutting through the rhythm. A thin whimper, a breath catching Sage's claws, ticking as she paced 3 steps one way and 3 steps back. The match flared. Flame caught the curls of cedar shavings, crawled along split pine, and lifted into orange life. Heat began to gather slowly, almost shyly, as if the room had forgotten how to welcome it. Nathan stripped off his jacket and knelt beside the blanket. The largest pup blinked up at him with fierce offense, as if being rescued had interrupted important business. "Ranger," Nathan murmured. The name had already stuck. The timid female trembled so violently that her paws tapped the blanket. "Daisy," he said, because there was something soft in her face despite the cold. Then the smallest. Nathan lifted him with 2 hands. The pup barely weighed anything, a damp handful of bones, fur, and stubborn breath. A white fleck marked his chin like a drop of spilled paint. "Pip," Nathan whispered. "Come on, little man." Sage stood 2 feet away, body rigid, amber eyes fixed on Pip. She had followed Nathan inside, but had not crossed fully into trust. Her ears twitched at every movement. When Nathan reached for a towel, she stepped forward. He stopped, showed her the towel, and moved again, more slowly. She watched him rub Pip's body in small circles, watched him slide a warm water bottle beneath the blanket, watched him cup his hand near the puppy's muzzle to feel the weak puff of air. The mother dog made a low sound that settled somewhere between a prayer and a warning. "I hear you," Nathan said. He reached for his phone. 1 bar flickered, vanished, returned like a candle in wind. He called Rachel Kim. She answered on the 2nd ring, clipped and alert. "Kim, veterinary." "Rachel, Nathan Pierce." The line hissed. "Nathan, are you hurt?" He looked at the blanket. "Not me. 3 shepherd pups, hypothermia, malnourished. 1 critical. Mother exhausted." A chair scraped on her end. Her voice changed. Less office, more battlefield. "How cold?" "Too cold. Smallest is barely breathing." "I am coming." "Road is almost gone." "Then I will drive before it disappears." The call cut before he could argue. Nathan stared at the phone for half a second, then set it down and went back to work. Minutes stretched. The stove ticked as metal warmed. Snow struck the windows in dry bursts. Ranger began to shiver harder, which Rachel had once told him could be a decent sign, the body fighting for itself. Daisy's trembling slowed after Nathan wrapped her in a 2nd towel. Pip stayed wrong. Too quiet. Too limp. Nathan kept 1 hand against him, counting breaths. He did not want to count, because counting had betrayed him before. 4 years earlier, in a shattered room overseas, he had counted the seconds between Eli Brooks's breaths, while Atlas, the working dog who had saved them twice that night, bled against Nathan's knee. He had counted because counting gave panic a job. He had counted until there was nothing left to count. A crack of wind slammed against the cabin wall. Sage barked. Headlights flashed through the front window smeared by snow. Nathan stood just as the door burst open, and Dr. Rachel Kim stepped in with a medical bag in one hand and snow packed along the shoulders of her red parka. Rachel was 36, lean and steady, with black hair twisted under a knit cap and dark eyes that missed very little. She stamped once on the mat, saw the blanket, and crossed the room without wasting a word. "Show me." Nathan moved aside. Sage moved in front of the puppies. Rachel stopped, instantly lowering her gaze and turning slightly sideways. "Hello, Mama," she said, calm as warm water. "I am here to help. You can supervise. I can already tell you are management." June would have laughed. Nathan almost did a short breath through his nose that surprised him. Sage sniffed Rachel's sleeve. Antiseptic, dog's wool, snow. After a tense moment, she stepped aside, though her stare made it clear Rachel was on probation. Rachel checked Ranger first. Cold, thin, but stubborn. Ranger gave a tiny, protesting squeak. "Exactly. He has opinions." Daisy came next. "Good response. We need fluids soon, but warmth first." Then Pip. Rachel's face sharpened. She laid 2 fingers against his chest, then leaned close with a stethoscope. The room seemed to shrink around that small body. Nathan's hands curled against his thighs. "Rachel, he is alive." 2 words, enough to let air back into the cabin. She worked with gentle speed, warming fluids, rubbing limbs, checking gums, giving careful drops of electrolyte solution. Nathan followed every instruction. "Hold this, not too hot. Tilt him. Keep his head here." Sage watched, nose nearly level with the blanket. Once she nudged Daisy back toward the warmth with a delicacy that made Nathan's throat tighten. Outside, the storm screamed through the trees. Inside, the circle around the stove became the whole world. Nearly an hour passed before Pip's body suddenly jerked. His back arched, his tiny legs stiffened, and then he went slack in Nathan's hands. The old room overseas came back with brutal clarity. Eli's blood on dust, Atlas trying to stand, a medic shouting. Nathan's hands started shaking so hard, Pip's head trembled against his palm. "Nathan." Rachel's voice cut through firm but not harsh. "Look at me." He did. Her eyes held him there. "Not then. Here. Breathe with me. Hold him steady." He dragged in air. It scraped all the way down. Rachel stimulated Pip's chest with 2 fingers bent close, waited. 1 second. 2. The stove popped. Sage whined high and thin. Then Pip coughed a tiny, wet sound no bigger than a match breaking. His chest rose. Nathan bowed his head over him, eyes burning from smoke or memory, or both. Rachel exhaled. "There you are, Trouble." Sage stepped closer and touched Pip's muzzle with her nose. The puppy's mouth opened in a weak complaint. It was the finest sound Nathan had heard in years. When Rachel finally sat back on her heels, her hair had slipped loose from her cap, and her cheeks were flushed from work. "They have a chance," she said. "Tonight matters." "I will stay up," I assumed. She glanced around the bare cabin, the single mug by the sink, the neatly stacked wood, the military precision of a life built to avoid surprise. Then she looked at the shepherd mother curled near the blanket, now close enough that her shoulder almost touched Nathan's knee. "What is her name?" "I do not know." As if hearing the question, the dog shifted. The leather collar around her neck, hidden beneath wet fur, turned toward the firelight. A metal tag glinted. Nathan reached slowly, asking with his posture before his hand. Sage let him touch the collar. The tag was scratched, old, and rimmed with rust, but the letters emerged under his thumb. Sage. Beneath it, smaller, Hawthorne Outdoor School. Rachel read it over his shoulder. So she had a home. Nathan stared at the tag while snow struck the windows and 3 puppies breathed under blankets beside the stove. Maybe she was trying to get back to it. Sage rested her head on the floor, eyes open, fixed on her children. The cabin no longer felt empty. It felt like something wounded had been carried inside, and not all of it had 4 legs. Morning settled over Bend under a hard gray sky, the kind that made the snow look older than it was. The storm had eased, but not left, and along Galveston Avenue, plows pushed through the drifts with yellow lights flashing like tired stars. Nathan drove into town with the heater blowing against his boots and the smell of wet dog still clinging to his jacket. He had slept 30 minutes, maybe less. Back at the cabin, Rachel had promised to stay until he returned, and Sage had watched him leave with such stern suspicion that he had found himself explaining the plan to her twice. "I will be back," he had said. Sage had blinked once, unimpressed. Now he parked outside Miller's Griddle and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. Hawthorne Outdoor School. Fresh boot prints. A food bowl. A mother dog who had spent her last strength begging a town to listen. None of it sat right. The diner bell rang when he stepped inside. Warmth hit him first, then the smell of bacon, coffee, toast, and damp wool. June Miller looked up from behind the counter and froze with the coffee pot in midair. "Well, look at that," she said. "The storm dragged you back in one piece." "Most of me." "Dogs?" Nathan nodded. "Alive." June's face changed so fast it made her look younger. "Thank God." In the corner booth, Deputy Mark Ellis closed a folder and stood. He had the braced look of a man expecting bad news he had earned. "Pierce." Nathan walked over and slid into the booth without taking off his coat. "Tell me about Hawthorne Outdoor School." Mark's mouth tightened. June came with coffee and did not pretend she was not listening. Mark rubbed the back of his neck. "Camp north of town. Forest education program years ago. Kids' trails, summer classes, that sort of thing. It shut down after funding dried up and the old director passed. Property changed hands twice. Last sale was to Grant Whitaker." June set the mug down harder than necessary. "Of course it was." Nathan looked between them. "Problem? Grant buys things that used to matter," June said. "Then he waits until nobody can afford to care about them." Mark gave her a look that failed to silence anything. "He is a real estate investor. Owns several old lots outside town. Hawthorne's been vacant." "Not vacant," Nathan said. "There were dogs under the dining hall counter. 3 pups. They nearly froze." The words sat on the table. Mark looked down at his folder. "I got a call 3 days ago about a shepherd near that road." "I know." Mark's eyes came up. Nathan did not raise his voice. That made it worse. "I checked the area," Mark said quietly. "I saw tracks, but the storm was coming and I figured she was just ranging. No aggression, no injured person. I cleared it." June made a small sound in her throat, not quite anger, not quite sorrow. Mark's jaw worked once. "That is on me." Before Nathan could answer, the diner door opened, and a tall man in a black wool overcoat stepped inside, bringing a blade of cold air with him. Grant Whitaker had the polished look of someone who never carried his own firewood. His dark hair was combed back, his boots shined despite the slush, and his expression settled into place before anyone spoke to him. He noticed Nathan, then Mark, then the old tag Nathan had set on the table. A faint crease appeared between his eyebrows. "Is there an issue with one of my properties?" June muttered. "Good morning to you too." Grant ignored her. Nathan picked up the tag. Found a shepherd and 3 puppies at Hawthorne. Grant removed one glove, finger by finger. Strays get into abandoned structures all the time. The puppies were dying. That is unfortunate. The room went still. Even the cook behind the pass stopped scraping the griddle. Nathan leaned back, studying him. Someone had been there recently. Boot prints, food bag, bowl. Grant's eyes did not move, but something in his face cooled another degree. If someone left food, perhaps someone tried to help. Not enough to call anyone. Mr. Pierce, I sympathize with your concern, truly. But I cannot be responsible for every animal that wanders onto private land during winter. June put both hands on her hips. Funny how sympathy sounds when it has frostbite. Mark stepped in before Grant could answer. I need to inspect the property. With a warrant? Grant asked smoothly. Mark held his gaze. With your permission, unless you prefer the warrant. For the first time, annoyance showed. I have contractors scheduled there later this week. The buildings are unsafe. I do not want civilians wandering around and creating liability. Nathan stood. He was not theatrical about it. One moment seated, the next upright, 6 feet 2 inches of quiet objection. Those puppies were liability when they were under your roof. Grant's mouth tightened. They were not under my roof by invitation. He turned toward the door. Handle your rescued animals however you like, Deputy. Keep my name out of town gossip. The bell rang after him, bright and ridiculous in the silence he left behind. June watched him through the window. I hope he steps in a puddle deep enough to reconsider his childhood. Mark actually smiled, barely. Then the smile died. I will pull the property files. Nathan finished half the coffee in one swallow. I am going back out there. Now? Before more snow covers the tracks. Mark hesitated. I will meet you after I check in. Nathan heard the guilt under it, raw and useful. Do that. Hawthorne Camp looked different by daylight, but not better. The clearing lay under fresh snow, the buildings hunched and silent, the old sign creaking in the wind. Nathan moved through the dining hall with slow care. He photographed the boot prints, the torn food bag, the corner where the puppies had lain. The room smelled colder now, emptier. Near the collapsed counter, he found the metal bowl again. A thin disk of ice had formed over what remained inside. He cracked it with his glove and lifted out a small piece of meat, frozen hard but not old. Fresh enough. Just enough. His stomach tightened. Someone had not ignored Sage completely. Someone had fed her enough to keep her returning, enough to keep the puppies alive one more day, but not enough to save them. That was a cruel kind of almost. Outside, near the back entrance, he crouched beside the tire track he had seen disappearing under snow. Most of it was gone, but one partial tread remained beneath the porch overhang. He took a picture, then heard a branch snap beyond the bunkhouse. Nathan stood very still. The forest gave back only wind. Then his phone buzzed, startling in the quiet. Mark's name lit the screen. Pierce, Nathan answered. I ran the maintenance schedule, Mark said, his voice low. Whitaker has a property service. One of their trucks logged mileage near Hawthorne 2 nights ago. Plate matches the partial a plow driver saw on the north road. Nathan looked toward the trees where the sound had come from. Someone may still be watching the place. Get out of there. I am on my way. Nathan slipped the phone into his pocket and moved toward his truck without turning his back fully to the buildings. When he reached the clearing's edge, he looked once more at the dining hall. Snow drifted through the broken doorway and settled over the corner where 3 puppies had nearly faded from the world. At the cabin an hour later, Sage rose the moment Nathan stepped inside. Ranger and Daisy slept by the stove. Pip lay tucked in a towel under Rachel's watchful hand, breathing thin but steady. Sage walked to Nathan, sniffed the snow on his pants, then pressed her head gently into his palm. It was not a request. It was not surrender. It was a tired mother's acknowledgement that he had returned as promised. Nathan closed his fingers lightly against her fur. For a second, the cabin held the kind of peace that comes before a harder truth arrives. Then Mark texted a single sentence. Plate belongs to Whitaker's crew. Winter held the forest outside Nathan's cabin in a quiet fist. But inside, the room had begun to make sounds it had not made in years. The stove cracked and ticked. Towels rustled. Tiny claws scratched against old floorboards, uncertain and uneven, like little taps from another life, asking to be let in. 3 days after the rescue, Ranger became the first puppy to decide that survival was not enough. He wanted exploration. The largest of the litter stood on wobbly legs near the blanket, sniffed the air, and took 4 determined steps toward Nathan's boot before tipping sideways into a rolled towel. He lay there for 1 offended second, then pushed himself back up as if the floor had insulted him personally. Nathan watched from the wall beside the stove, a mug of coffee cooling untouched in his hand. "That is ambitious for a man shaped like a potato." Ranger sneezed. Across the blanket, Daisy lifted her head at the noise, saw that Ranger had not been eaten by the towel, and tucked her nose back under her paw. She was the careful one. Every pop from the stove made her flinch. Every dropped spoon sent her behind Nathan's boot, where she peered out with dark eyes and an expression that accused the world of poor manners. Pip, the smallest, had no interest in exploration or accusation. Pip had discovered warmth, specifically the warmth inside the sleeve of Nathan's old flannel shirt. He slept there now, tucked against Nathan's forearm, his tiny body rising and falling in steady breaths that still felt like a miracle each time Nathan checked. Sage lay between the door and the blanket, front paws crossed, head high. Her sable coat had begun to shine again now that food and heat had found her, but she still carried herself like a guard posted outside a hospital room. Whenever Nathan moved too quickly, her ears lifted. Whenever Ranger toddled too close to the woodpile, she gave one low sound, and the puppy reconsidered his military campaign. Nathan had worked with disciplined dogs. Sage was something else. A mother with command authority. Rachel Kim arrived just after noon with her medical bag, a bag of puppy formula, and snow clinging to the cuffs of her jeans. She stepped inside, took one look at Ranger trying to chew the corner of a blanket, and said, "Well, someone has promoted himself." Nathan opened the door wider. "He is a menace." "That is a clinical sign of improvement." Sage stood and approached Rachel with grave purpose. Rachel lowered one hand and waited for inspection. "Good afternoon, Supervisor." Sage sniffed her wrist, her coat, the bag, then turned and walked back to the puppies as if granting temporary clearance. Rachel glanced at Nathan. "You are aware she thinks she owns this cabin." "She may be right." That made Rachel smile, and for a moment the room felt almost ordinary. Then she knelt beside the blanket and began the examination. Ranger protested dramatically when she checked his paws. Daisy trembled but held still after Nathan placed 2 fingers lightly against her shoulder. Pip woke when Rachel eased him from the sleeve, blinked at her, and made a sound so small it could have been a complaint filed in writing. Rachel's face softened. "Hello, Pip." Nathan heard the change in her voice. He did not like needing good news so badly. "How is he?" Rachel checked his temperature, gums, lungs, and reflexes with the careful patience of someone who understood that hope should never be handled roughly. "Better. Not safe yet, but better." Nathan looked away and reached for another log. "I can keep the stove steadier at night." "You also need to sleep." "I sleep. Leaning against the wall with one eye open is not sleep. It is surveillance." He set the log in the stove and shut the iron door. I am good at surveillance. That was not a compliment. Her tone was light, but her eyes were not. She packed away the thermometer and sat back on her heels. Nathan, animals recovering from trauma read the room. They need calm. So do people. He did not answer. Outside wind dragged loose snow across the porch. Inside, Ranger began tugging at Nathan's bootlace, victorious over its lack of resistance. Rachel watched the puppy, then looked back at Nathan. June told me about Eli Brooks. The name landed like a pan dropped in a quiet kitchen. Nathan's hand stilled on the stove latch. Sage noticed first, lifting her head. Rachel spoke gently. She did not tell me details, only that he mattered. Nathan stared at the floorboards. The cabin seemed to grow colder despite the fire. He was my teammate, my closest friend. His voice sounded unused. Atlas was his dog, working shepherd, best nose I ever saw. We went into a building for 2 hostages. Bad intel, bad walls, bad luck. Rachel did not interrupt. That helped. Atlas found the first pressure plate, saved all of us. Missed the second because I called him forward. Nathan's jaw tightened so hard a muscle jumped near his scar. Eli went after him. I brought one of them out breathing. Neither made it home. Ranger stopped chewing the bootlace and looked up as if even puppy foolishness could feel the shift in the air. Rachel's voice stayed low. You blame yourself. Nathan gave a laugh without humor. I was team lead. That is not the same sentence. He looked at her then, sharp and tired. It is when you are the one left. Pip coughed. It was tiny, no more than a hitch in the breath, but Nathan moved instantly, crossing the room and crouching beside him. Rachel followed, all softness gone from her face. Pip's chest rose fast, then shallow. His little body heated under the towel. Fever spike, Rachel said. Cool cloth. Now. Nathan grabbed the bowl of clean water from the counter and a soft rag. His hands shook once as he wrung it out. Not from cold. The cabin blurred at the edges. Another room pressing over this one. Voices, dust. Blood, a monitor that had turned into a flat sound in his memory, even though there had been no monitor overseas. Only a medic saying words nobody wanted. Nathan, Rachel's voice cut in. Here, with me. Put the cloth under his belly. Gentle. He obeyed. Pip's mouth opened. No sound came out. Sage rose and came close, whining high through her nose. Daisy crawled toward her mother. Ranger sat very still. Nathan placed 2 fingers near Pip's chest, feeling the tiny flutter there. Too quick, too fragile. Stay, he whispered. You hear me? Stay. Rachel cooled the puppy, carefully gave measured drops from a syringe, rubbed his chest, checked his gums. Minutes stretched into something cruel. Then Pip coughed and sucked in a breath so sudden that his whole body jerked. Nathan's shoulders folded forward. He did not touch his eyes, but they burned anyway. Rachel sat back slowly. There. That is better. Sage lowered her head and nudged Pip's side, then to Nathan's surprise, nudged his wrist too, as if correcting both of her patients at once. Rachel let out a tired little laugh. She is going to need a badge. Nathan looked down at Sage, at Ranger leaning against his boot, at Daisy pressed into her mother's fur, at Pip breathing under the damp cloth. Something inside him had been braced for years, locked tight against impact. It did not open. Not yet. But it moved. Rachel packed her bag as afternoon light dimmed behind the windows. At the door, she paused. You said they deserve better than someone who cannot protect what he loves. Nathan did not answer. She nodded toward the puppies.
They are still here because you stayed when it hurt. The door closed behind her, leaving the cabin warm and too quiet. Later, when night settled over the forest, Nathan woke from a half-sleep on the floor. Something heavy rested against his leg. Sage had moved across the room and laid her head on his knee. Her eyes were open, steady, neither asking nor accusing, just there.
Nathan lifted his hand slowly and set it on her head. Outside, snow whispered down through the pines. Inside, Pip breathed. The morning after Pip's fever broke, Ben woke under a pale winter sun that turned every roofline silver and every snowbank bright enough to make people squint. The air still cut hard, but the storm had passed, leaving behind that clean silence that makes even a town seem sorry for what it failed to hear. June Miller took the photograph by accident, or at least that was what she told everyone later. Nathan had carried the puppies to Rachel's clinic for a follow-up exam in a cardboard produce crate lined with towels. Sage walked beside him through the clinic parking lot, her body angled against the wind, her torn ear flicking at every passing engine. Nathan crouched at the door to shield the crate while Rachel unlocked from inside. His gloved hand rested over the towels, not holding the puppies down, just covering them from the cold. Ranger had his nose lifted. Daisy hid behind Ranger's shoulder. Pip was wrapped like a tiny loaf in blue cloth, with only his white chin fleck showing. Sage leaned against Nathan's leg, scanning the street with the solemn authority of a sentry. June had been delivering soup to Rachel because, in her words, veterinarians were terrible at feeding themselves. She saw the scene, raised her old digital camera, and clicked before she thought too much about it. By noon, the printed picture sat beside the register at Miller's Griddle. By 2, someone had taken a phone photo of the print. By evening, half of Bend had seen Nathan Pierce looking at 3 rescued puppies, as if the whole storm had narrowed down to their breathing. The picture did something words had not. People remembered. A woman from the bakery remembered shutting the door when Sage barked. The teenager with the red ski jacket remembered throwing the snowball and went quiet at dinner until his mother asked what was wrong. Mark Ellis remembered the call he had cleared, and the memory sat beside him at his desk like an unwelcome witness. People had seen a dog in distress and mistaken her for an inconvenience. That kind of guilt does not arrive loudly. It enters the room, removes its coat, and waits. 3 days later, Nathan heard a knock on his cabin door. He was kneeling near the stove, trying to convince Ranger that bootlaces were not prey. Sage stood at once, ears high. Daisy vanished behind the wood basket. Pip slept in Nathan's lap, which had become less a habit and more a legal arrangement. Nathan opened the door to find a girl standing on the porch in a purple winter coat, a knit hat pulled low over her brown hair, and snow dusted across her shoulders. She held a small paper bag with both hands. Her cheeks were red from the cold. Her serious eyes looked familiar in a way that made Nathan's chest tighten before his mind caught up. "Hi," she said. "I am Hannah Brooks, Eli's daughter." The name went through him quietly and without mercy. Nathan had last seen her at a memorial service when she was 8, standing beside her mother in a black dress, clutching a folded flag ribbon in one hand. Now she was 12 taller, thinner, with Eli's steady gaze and the careful posture of a child who had learned not to ask too much from grieving adults. Nathan opened the door wider. "Come in before you freeze." Hannah stepped inside and looked around the cabin with open curiosity, taking in the stove, the stacked wood, the simple table, the dog blankets, the 3 puppies, and Sage, who stood between Hannah and the room like a judge in fur. Hannah held out the paper bag. "My mom said I could bring these, puppy toys, and treats, but Dr. Kim said only if you say okay." Nathan took the bag. "Dr. Kim outranks me on treats. She seems like she outranks everybody." She would agree. Hannah smiled a little. It changed her face.
Ranger chose that moment to charge across the floor with all the power his small legs could manufacture. He slipped twice, recovered with heroic confidence,
and collided gently with Hannah's boot. The girl laughed, sudden and bright. Sage watched her. The sound did not frighten the mother dog. Instead, her head tilted, as if the laugh had reminded her of something from the old Camp Children's Summer a Safer room. Hannah knelt slowly. "Hi, little guy." Ranger climbed into her lap without consulting anyone. Daisy peered from behind the wood basket, betrayed by curiosity. Pip woke, yawned, and looked annoyed that visitors had disrupted his schedule of being carried. Nathan stood near the counter with the treat bag in his hand, unsure what to do with the ache pressing behind his ribs. Hannah stroked Ranger's back with careful fingers. "My dad told me about you." Nathan's hand tightened around the paper bag. "He did?" "He said you were quiet unless something mattered. He said you never left anyone behind." The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Outside, snow slid from a branch and thumped softly beside the porch. Nathan looked at Sage, because he could not look at Hannah for a moment. "Your dad was the brave one." Hannah nodded in a way that suggested she had heard many versions of that and believed all of them, but still needed more. "Mom says brave people can still be sad." Nathan gave the smallest nod. "Your mom is right." Hannah looked down at Ranger. "I saw Sage before, near the old camp road, a few weeks ago before the big storm. I was walking with my friend after school. We heard little squeaking under one of the buildings. I wanted to check, but a man came out by a truck and told us to get away because it was private property." Nathan went still. "What man?" "I do not know. Gray jacket, beard. He looked scared more than mean." The description did not sound like Grant Whitaker. A worker, maybe. A guard. Someone close enough to know and afraid enough to stay quiet. After Hannah left, promising to return only if Sage allowed it, Nathan called Mark. The deputy answered from the sheriff's office, where paper rustled and a printer hummed. "Tell me you have something good," Nathan said. Mark exhaled. "I have something messy. Hawthorne Camp is one of 7 properties Whitaker bought in the last 2 years. Complaints on 5. Broken fencing, roof collapse, trespass hazards, wildlife issues. Most reports got delayed, shuffled, or settled with small fines. Someone chased Hannah Brooks away from the camp weeks ago." Silence snapped tight on the line. "Hannah?" She heard Puppies. A man by a truck told her to leave. Mark swore softly, then caught himself. "Sorry. She is not on the phone." Still. Papers moved faster now. "I will find the maintenance crew names." At the cabin, life kept pushing forward, whether men solved anything or not. Ranger learned to climb onto Nathan's boot and declare victory. Daisy began crossing the floor if Hannah sat still enough and spoke softly. Pip discovered that if he made one faint squeak, Nathan appeared like weather. Sage watched it all, still guarding, still wary, but less hollow around the eyes. That evening, June arrived with 2 sacks of dog food, a casserole, and a look that dared Nathan to refuse either. Behind her came an older neighbor with firewood, then a young couple with blankets. Nobody stayed long. Most people seemed embarrassed by their own kindness, leaving things on the porch as if the cabin might bite. Nathan stood in the doorway while Sage sat beside him, the puppies stirring behind them in the firelight. June looked at the growing pile and gave a satisfied nod. "Town took its sweet time waking up, but it is up now." Nathan watched taillights disappear through the trees. "Guilt is loud." June's voice softened. "So is grace when it finally clears its throat." Later that night, Mark called again. "The man Hannah saw may be Ray Dunn, temporary security for Whitaker's company. I am asking around." Nathan looked toward the stove, where Sage had finally fallen asleep, with her nose near Pip's back. Ask fast. Mark paused. There is a town meeting tomorrow. Property safety was already on the agenda. Hawthorne will be discussed. Nathan did not like the shape of that sentence. I do not do meetings. You may need to do this one. Across the room, Sage opened her eyes as if she understood the word need. Nathan looked at the mother dog who had run through a blizzard because nobody else would act. His answer came out low. Tell me when. Evening fell over Bend with a blue cold that made the town hall windows glow like small squares of fire. Snow lay piled along the curbs, and people entered the building stamping boots, shaking flakes from hats, carrying coffee and paper cups, and speaking in lowered voices that always rose when guilt gathered in public. Nathan stood near the back wall with his arms folded, wishing he were anywhere else. The room smelled of wet wool, old wood, and the burnt edge of percolator coffee. Folding chairs scraped across the floor. June Miller sat near the center aisle with a notebook she had no intention of using, quietly. Rachel Kim stood along the side wall in her clinic coat, having come straight from work. Deputy Mark Ellis moved between the council table and the sheriff's row with a folder thick enough to make Grant Whitaker uncomfortable, which was the first encouraging thing Nathan had seen all day. Hannah Brooks sat beside her mother 2 rows from the front, hands folded around a small dog toy she had brought without realizing it. On the agenda, the topic was property safety. In the room, everyone knew the topic was Sage. Sheriff Laura Benton opened the meeting with standard language about winter hazards, abandoned structures, and county responsibility. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with iron-gray hair and a voice that could stop a room without rising. Mark spoke after her. He did not hide behind the folder. Before we discuss enforcement, I need to say something. 3 days before the storm, I answered a call about a German Shepherd near the North Logging Road. I saw signs of an animal in the area, but I did not follow far enough. I treated it as a stray complaint. That was wrong. A murmur moved through the room. Mark kept going. That dog was trying to lead someone to her puppies. Because I missed it, those pups spent more time in freezing conditions. I cannot change that. I can make sure we do not ignore what the investigation shows. Nathan watched him with a different kind of attention. Admitting failure in uniform is not small. It is a man taking his own armor off in front of people who may use it against him. June's face softened, though she would deny it if asked. Mark opened the folder. Hawthorne Camp is owned by Cascade Ridge Development principal owner Grant Whitaker. Complaints include broken access points, collapsed flooring, exposed wiring, and unsecured structures. Maintenance logs place company vehicles at the property during the same period witnesses reported hearing animals inside. Grant Whitaker sat in the front row in a navy overcoat, legs crossed, expression polished smooth. When Mark finished, Grant stood as if a stage had been handed to him. This is an unfortunate emotional situation, he said, but we should be careful not to confuse a stray animal incident with a legal attack on private ownership. My company has scheduled repairs. Any suggestion that we intentionally allowed animals to suffer is irresponsible. June whispered loudly. There it is. The speech bought itself shoes. Someone coughed to hide a laugh. Grant's eyes flicked toward her, then away. A woman from the bakery raised her hand. I saw that dog. She came to my door. I thought she wanted food, and I shut it. Her voice broke on the last word. If I had known. She did not finish. The teenager in the red ski jacket stood next to a face red for reasons that had little to do with heat. I threw snow at her. His mother put a hand over her mouth. I am sorry, he said, looking at the floor. I know she is not here, but I am sorry. The room changed then. Not dramatically. Real change rarely performs. People shifted from defending themselves to remembering clearly.
A man from the tire shop had seen Sage near the old road. A postal worker had watched her run behind the grocery store.
A retired teacher had heard barking beyond the camp fence 2 weeks earlier. Each small memory became another stitch in the pattern. Nathan hoped he could stay silent. He had saved the puppies. He had reported what he found. Public words belonged to men who liked standing in rooms. Then June raised her hand.
Nathan Pierce should tell them what he saw.
Nathan closed his eyes for half a second. Betrayal thy name is diner owner.
Rachel looked down, hiding a smile that was no help at all. Sheriff Benton turned to him.
Mr. Pierce.
Every face in the room shifted. Nathan pushed off the wall. His boots sounded too loud as he walked toward the front. He stopped beside Mark, rested one hand on the back of a chair, and looked at the people of Bend. He had spoken in briefings, in extraction plans, in rooms where maps mattered and hesitation cost blood. This was worse. These people had casseroles. Sage ran through town in a blizzard, he said. His voice was low, but the room carried it.
She stopped in front of people and looked back. That is not begging. That is leading. No one moved. She crossed ice. She went back to doors after people pushed her away. She did not do that for herself. She did it because 3 puppies were under a broken counter at Hawthorne Camp, wrapped in scraps she dragged together with her teeth. Hannah's fingers tightened around the toy. Nathan saw it and had to look away. When I found them, the smallest was barely breathing. Their mother stood there and let a stranger pick them up because she had run out of choices. The room seemed to lean toward him. I do not care about speeches. I care that a dog understood duty better than half the adults in this town that morning. It was a hard sentence. He let it be hard. She asked for help. Most of us did not listen. Grant rose, face stiff. With respect, Mr. Pierce, this is moving, but it does not establish wrongdoing. Before Nathan could answer, a sound came from the back doors. A soft click of claws on wood. Heads turned. Hannah had slipped out during Grant's speech, and now she stood in the doorway holding Sage's leash with both hands. Sage stepped into the hall slowly, her sable coat brushed clean her torn ear high, her amber eyes moving over the room with solemn suspicion. She did not bark. She did not cower. She walked down the center aisle as if she had been summoned to testify and had decided the court needed supervision. A few people began to cry quietly. The teenager in the red jacket lowered his head. Sage reached Nathan and sat beside his left leg, close enough that her shoulder touched him. Then she looked at Grant Whitaker. The silence that followed was the kind no lawyer can polish. June whispered, "Good girl." Sheriff Benton cleared her throat. Mr. Whitaker, the county will inspect Hawthorne Camp tomorrow morning. Grant's jaw tightened. My attorney will respond. He may join us, the sheriff said. Mark's radio crackled before the meeting could move on. He stepped aside, listened, then looked at Nathan. Whatever he heard drained the color from his face. Sheriff, Mark said. Plow unit reports 2 Cascade Ridge trucks headed up the north road toward Hawthorne. Grant's expression did not change fast enough, which was its own confession. Nathan's hand dropped to Sage's collar. The dog was already standing, muscles tense beneath his fingers. Sheriff Benton turned to Grant. You said repairs were scheduled later this week. Mark grabbed his coat. They are moving now. Nathan looked at Sage. Her eyes were fixed on the door. The meeting dissolved into voices, chairs scraping, questions, June saying something unkind about timing. Nathan did not wait for permission. He moved for the exit with Sage at his side and Mark behind him. Outside, the cold struck clean and hard. Snow had started again, light
but steady dusting the street under the town hall lamps.
Mark unlocked his cruiser. "Pierce, ride with me."
Nathan opened the passenger door, and Sage leaped into the back seat before anyone could debate whether dogs were allowed in county vehicles. Mark looked at her in the mirror. "I guess that answers that." Nathan buckled in. For the first time all night, his mouth twitched. "She outranks you, too." The cruiser pulled away from Town Hall, lights flashing blue across the snow, headed toward the old camp where the truth was trying to disappear before morning.
Night pressed low over the North Road, and snow returned in fine, hard grains that hissed across the cruiser windshield. Ben fell behind them in a wash of blue emergency light, and the forest closed in fast black pines rising on both sides like walls. Deputy Mark Ellis drove with both hands on the wheel, jaws set, while Nathan sat beside him listening to the tires search for grip beneath the fresh snow. In the back seat, Sage stood braced with her front paws, wide nose lifted toward the cracked window, reading the night in a language older than roads. "You ever had a dog in this cruiser before?" Nathan asked. Mark glanced in the mirror. Sage stared back. "Not one that looked like she was evaluating my driving." "She is. I am doing my best." The joke was small, but it kept the dark from getting too heavy for half a mile. Mark's radio popped with Sheriff Benton coordinating units and warning that road conditions were deteriorating. The plow driver had seen 2 Cascade Ridge trucks turn toward Hawthorne Camp 20 minutes earlier. Officially, it might be emergency winterization. Unofficially, everyone in that cruiser knew what men did at night when an inspection waited at dawn. They reached the camp road and killed the siren before the final bend. Headlights glowed through the trees ahead. Mark parked behind a stand of pines, and Nathan opened the back door before Sage could express her opinion about delay. She hit the snow and moved low, not pulling ahead, not barking, just locked on the camp. The clearing appeared in broken pieces through the falling snow. 2 white work trucks stood near the dining hall. Their hazard lights blinked amber against the old walls. 3 men moved between the porch and a smaller storage building, carrying plywood sheets, toolboxes, and black trash bags. One man hammered boards over a window from inside, the blows dull and hurried. Another dragged something from the dining hall and tossed it into the truck bed. Mark muttered, "That better not be evidence." "It is evidence now," Nathan said. They moved from tree to tree, Sage between them. Mark called out when they reached the edge of the clearing. "Deschutes County Sheriff's Office. Step away from the trucks." The men froze. One dropped a pry bar into the snow. The oldest of the 3, a bearded man in a gray jacket, raised both hands. His face went pale when he saw Sage. The dog stopped dead, body rigid. A low sound came from her throat, not rage, recognition. Nathan looked at the man. "Ray Dunn." The bearded man swallowed. "I did not hurt them." Mark moved closer, one hand near his holster but not on it. "Then start explaining." Before Ray could speak, a shout came from behind the storage building. The youngest worker had backed away from Mark's command and stepped where snow had hidden a rotten cover over an old utility pit. The wood snapped with a crack like a rifle shot. He dropped through to his waist, then slid farther, arms flailing against the edge. "Help!" The clearing changed in an instant. Evidence, guilt, anger, all shoved aside by the simple fact of a body going down in the cold. Nathan ran. Sage bolted ahead of him, veering not toward the worker, but around the pit, nose low, paws light over the snow. "Stay back from the edge," Nathan barked. Mark grabbed Ray by the sleeve when he tried to rush forward. "No weight near the hole." The young worker clung to a splintered beam, chest heaving. Beneath him, the pit dropped into blackness. Water glimmered at the bottom, half frozen. The old camp had been built over more forgotten dangers than anyone had bothered to mark. Nathan dropped flat on his stomach several feet from the edge and spread his weight. The snow soaked instantly through his sleeves. "Look at me," he called.
Name. Tyler. The man's voice cracked. Tyler, keep your eyes on me.
Do not kick. The more you kick, the more that edge breaks. Sage barked once from the far side of the pit. Nathan turned his head. She stood near a mound of snow where the ground rose higher, pawing at the crust. Not random. He followed the line, saw an old support timber half buried under the drift, running beneath the snow toward the pit. A safer anchor point. Mark rope in your trunk. Toe strap. Get it. Mark sprinted. Ray stood, shaking hands, still raised, though nobody had told him to keep them up. I only fed them, he said, suddenly, voice breaking. The dogs. I gave them food. Mr. Whitaker said not to call animal control because inspectors would come. Said the property sale would fall apart. I thought if I fed the mama dog, maybe. He looked at Sage and could not finish. Nathan's eyes stayed on Tyler. Confess after we get him out. Mark returned with the toe strap. Nathan looped it around the buried timber Sage had found, tested it, then slid the free end toward Tyler with slow, careful pushes. Get it under your arms. Tyler's fingers were stiff from cold and panic. Twice he fumbled. On the third try, Sage lowered herself near the safer edge and barked, sharp and commanding. Tyler looked at her, startled enough to stop thrashing. Nathan used that breath of stillness. Now, under your arms. The strap caught. Mark and Ray took position behind Nathan, pulling on command. Easy, not fast. Pull with me. The rotten edge groaned. Tyler cried out as his boot slipped free and vanished into the dark water below. Nathan felt the strap bite into his gloves. His shoulder burned. Snow slid under his chest. For one terrible second, the beam shifted. Sage threw her weight backward on the far side, paws digging, barking as if hauling the whole night by sound alone. The strap held. Tyler came over the edge in a rush of snow, mud, and gasping terror. Mark dragged him clear. Nathan rolled onto his back, breath punching out in white clouds. Sage trotted to Tyler, sniffed his face once, then sneezed on him with unmistakable disapproval. Tyler laughed and sobbed at the same time. Fair, he whispered. Mark wrapped him in an emergency blanket from the cruiser, then turned to Ray. Now talk. Ray Dunn did. He talked in bursts, each sentence fogging in the cold. He had been hired as temporary security to keep trespassers out of Hawthorne. He had seen Sage weeks earlier near the dining hall, then heard the puppies. He called his supervisor, who called Grant. The instruction came back clear. Do not report animals. Do not invite county attention. Leave food if he wanted, but keep the site quiet until the sale closed. Ray had fed them when he could, always at night, ashamed but afraid of losing the job that paid for his wife's medicine. I should have called, he said, looking at Nathan. I know. Nathan wanted anger. It would have been easier than the man's wet, ruined face. Yes, he said. You should have. Mark recorded the statement on his body camera. Then he and Nathan searched the storage building while the workers sat by the cruiser. Inside, beneath a tarp and a stack of old program signs, Nathan found a cardboard box of photographs and enrollment records from Hawthorne Outdoor School. Children in bright summer shirts, counselors on trail hikes, a younger woman with curly blonde hair standing beside a sable German shepherd with a torn ear. On the back of the photo, written in blue ink, were the words, Megan Avery and Sage Camp Guardians. Nathan held the picture under his flashlight. The dog in the photo stood proud and well-fed, surrounded by children who trusted her. Not a stray. Never just a stray. Tires crunched behind them. A black SUV entered the clearing and stopped hard near the trucks. Grant Whitaker stepped out in polished boots not built for this kind of night. His eyes moved from the workers to Mark, then to the box in Nathan's hands. This is private property. Mark turned slowly. It is also an active county investigation. Grant's face tightened. Then he saw Sage standing beside Nathan, snow on her muzzle, amber eyes fixed on him. That animal was found on my land, he said. Until ownership is clarified, I want it removed from Mr. Pierce's cabin and placed in county control. Sage gave one low growl. Nathan's hand settled lightly on her collar. The forest went silent around them, even the wind seeming to pause. Mark looked from Grant to Nathan. Nobody moved. Somewhere behind them, the old dining hall door swung open and shut in the storm, and the sound was like a warning being repeated. Dawn came to bend behind a ceiling of low clouds, with snow hanging in the air but not yet falling, as if the sky itself had paused to listen. At Rachel Kim's clinic, the lights were already on, warm rectangles against the blue morning, and inside the exam room, Sage stood between the door and her puppies with the grave patience of a mother who had learned that safety could vanish if she blinked too long. Ranger chewed the edge of a towel with renewed confidence. Daisy sat pressed against Pip, watching every human footstep. Pip slept in a heated nest Rachel had arranged from fleece and medical pads, his white chin fleck rising and falling with breaths that were stronger than they had been, though still too precious for Nathan to trust completely. Grant Whitaker had made his threat at Hawthorne Camp in front of a deputy, 2 workers, and a shivering man wrapped in an emergency blanket. By sunrise, his attorney had sent a letter. Nathan read it once in the clinic hallway and handed it to Rachel without changing expression. She read faster, and her mouth flattened. He is claiming the animals are evidence connected to his property and should be transferred to county animal control pending ownership review. Nathan looked through the exam room window at Sage. She looked back as if she knew paperwork had teeth. Can he do that? Rachel folded the letter. He can try, but moving Pip right now would be medically reckless, and I am willing to put that in writing with very sharp language. Sharp language from you sounds dangerous. It has billing codes. Mark Ellis arrived 10 minutes later with tired eyes, wet boots, and a stack of printed reports under one arm. He nodded to Nathan, then to Rachel. Sheriff Benton says Sage and the pups stay in medical foster care unless a judge orders otherwise. We are filing Ray Dunn's statement with the county attorney. Rachel taped a sign to the exam room door reading, "Do not disturb patients." Ranger barked at it. He disagrees with bureaucracy, Nathan said. Mark almost smiled. Same. The humor did not last. Mark laid out what they had. Ray's recorded statement, maintenance logs, photos of the boot prints, food bowl, and altered windows. The box of Hawthorne records, Grant's attempt to remove Sage before the inspection. Enough to raise serious questions, not yet enough to end the fight. Grant was careful. Men like him rarely left fingerprints where ordinary people expected them. They left delays, missing emails, instructions spoken over phones, and workers too scared to repeat them. That afternoon, Hannah Brooks came to the clinic with her mother and a folder from the public library. Her cheeks were red from the cold and from the importance of carrying something adults might need. She placed the folder on the reception counter in front of Nathan. I found Megan Avery. The name pulled Sage's head up from inside the exam room. Maybe it was the tone. Maybe dogs hear ghosts in syllables. Hannah opened the folder to a newspaper clipping from 7 years earlier. Hawthorne Outdoor School Director honored for Children's Nature Program. The photograph showed the same curly-haired woman from the box at camp kneeling beside Sage in summer sunlight. Children gathered around them laughing, hands on the dog's sable coat. Megan Avery had run Hawthorne as a place for children who had lost parents to war, wildfire illness, and accidents. The article said Sage had been rescued as a young dog from a roadside ditch and became the unofficial guardian of the camp. Nathan read the caption twice. She was not owned by Grant. Megan was, Hannah said softly. The article says Sage went everywhere with her. Rachel came out of the exam room wiping her hands. What happened to Megan? Hannah turned the page. The second clipping was smaller. Former camp director killed in flooding near Sisters. 3 years ago, an early spring flood washed out a rural road. Megan Avery's truck was found downstream. No mention of Sage. No mention of who took the dog after the camp closed. Nathan looked through the glass. Sage sat beside Pip, still as stone. Had she returned to Hawthorne because it had been home? Had she delivered her pups there because some deep map in her heart still marked that place as safe, even after the windows broke and the roof began to rot? The thought hurt in a clean, unexpected way. Not all homes remain worthy of the love that remembers them. Mark photographed the articles. This helps with ownership. If Megan had no surviving family, Sage may be legally unclaimed, not Whitaker property. Maybe, Rachel said. I dislike that phrase. Me too. At 4 o'clock, Ray Dunn came to the sheriff's office and made a full statement with an attorney from a veterans aid group sitting beside him, because June had heard about his wife's medicine and found someone who knew someone, which was how June did most of her civic work. Ray admitted he had found Sage and the puppies under the dining hall nearly 2 weeks before the storm. He had called his supervisor, who told him Grant wanted no report that could trigger inspection before a pending land deal. Ray left food at night, ashamed, afraid, and increasingly desperate. I told myself I was keeping them alive, he said on the recording, voice cracking. But I was keeping them hidden. Mark called Nathan after the statement. It is enough for a warrant to inspect company records and the site. Nathan stood outside the clinic watching late afternoon traffic slide through slush. Will it stick? I do not know, but it opens the door. Through the clinic window, he saw Hannah sitting cross-legged on the floor just outside the exam room, while Daisy inched toward her. Sage watched from the blanket, uncertain, but not alarmed. Pip slept under the heat lamp. Ranger had fallen asleep with his nose inside a rubber ring toy. Nathan felt the strange pull of it again, that dangerous invitation to care beyond the emergency. Saving lives was one thing. Letting them become part of yours was another. Grant Whitaker did not disappear. He used letters, calls, and clipped statements to local reporters about private property rights and unfortunate animal welfare confusion. He requested an injunction. He suggested Nathan had trespassed. He hinted that the sheriff's office was bending to sentiment. The more he spoke, the more Bend listened differently. People brought records of other neglected properties. Former Hawthorne counselors found old photos. A retired accountant located a donation fund that had once supported the camp and had never been properly closed. Every small fact became a stone in a wall Grant had not expected a town to build. That night, Mark called again, his voice low and quick. County judge signed the inspection order. We go in at first light. Nathan looked at the stove in the clinic recovery room, where Rachel had let him sit after hours because Pip did better when Sage could see him, and Sage did better when Nathan was nearby. Grant knows. His attorney was notified. Then he has tonight. Silence. Then Mark said, Yes. Nathan turned toward the window. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft but steady, covering Bend in white. Inside, Sage opened her eyes and looked toward the north road, as if the old camp had called her by name. Nathan zipped his jacket. Rachel saw him move and did not ask where he was going. She only said, Bring coffee back if you intend to do something foolish. That is not medical advice. It is survival advice. Nathan looked once at Sage, then at the sleeping puppies. Keep them here. Sage rose, offended by the plan. Rachel stepped between her and the door with a calm hand. Not this time, Mama. Nathan left before his resolve could soften. At the curb, Mark's cruiser waited with headlights on. The inspection was set for morning, but both men knew evidence did not sleep politely through the night.
As Nathan climbed in, Mark handed him a spare flashlight. "Ready?" Nathan looked north where the forest road disappeared beneath falling snow. "No," he said. "But we are going."
The night before the inspection lay cold and windless over Deschutes National Forest, making every sound at Hawthorne Camp travel too far. Snow creaked under boots. A branch dropped powder with a soft thump. Somewhere in the dining hall, a loose board knocked once, then went still. Nathan and Mark reached the property just after 10, expecting trucks' lights, maybe Grant Whitaker's careful machinery of disappearance. Instead, they found something stranger. People. Not many at first. June Miller stood near the entrance sign in a red parka, holding a thermos like a weapon. Beside her, 2 retired teachers from Bend High sat in a pickup with the heater running. A plow driver leaned against his blade truck. Hannah Brooks's mother Claire stood with a flashlight and a wool hat pulled down over her ears. More headlights appeared through the trees every few minutes, quiet and deliberate. Mark stepped out of the cruiser and stared. "What is this?" June unscrewed the thermos. "Coffee." I mean all of this. Also coffee, but with witnesses.
Nathan looked around the clearing as another truck rolled in, carrying 2 members of the town council. Nobody crossed police tape. Nobody entered buildings. They simply parked along the access road, leaving headlights angled toward the camp like a ring of small moons. June handed Mark a cup. "Grant likes doing things when nobody is watching. We figured we would watch." Mark pinched the bridge of his nose. "You cannot organize a stakeout from a diner." "I did not organize, I mentioned." Nathan accepted coffee because refusing June was a longer fight than he had strength for. The warmth hit his hands through the paper cup. Across the clearing, Hawthorne's dining hall stood under the gathered light, its broken windows boarded halfway, its old signs swinging faintly. For years, the place had been allowed to become invisible. Tonight, it was seen. Grant did not come. No trucks arrived. At dawn, Sheriff Benton County inspectors,
Animal control and a building safety officer entered the property under the inspection order. Mark led them through the dining hall, storage shed, bunkhouses, and utility areas. Nathan stayed outside the tape, jaw tight, while June narrated quietly to anyone nearby, despite not being asked. The inspectors found exposed wiring, floor collapse, unsecured chemicals in a storage cabinet, and fresh attempts to remove materials linked to animal sheltering. They photographed the corner where Sage had hidden her puppies, the bowl, the food bag, and the utility pit where Tyler had fallen. By mid-morning, Grant Whitaker's attorney called the sheriff. By noon, Grant himself arrived and stood at the edge of the clearing. No polished speech, ready for the sight of half the town watching him under a flat winter sky. Sheriff Benton spoke to him privately, though not so privately that June did not lean in from 12 feet away with the commitment of a woman listening for a timer. Mark came back 20 minutes later. "He is negotiating." Nathan watched Grant's face through the blowing snow. "Meaning?"
"Meaning fines, civil liability, possible criminal neglect if the county attorney pushes it. He wants out." Out came in the form of a sale. Not immediately, not magically, but quickly enough that by the end of the week, Bend had a signed agreement to purchase Hawthorne Camp at a reduced price through a community trust and county support. Grant's company would pay penalties and fund environmental cleanup. Ray Dunn agreed to testify if needed. Nobody cheered when the papers were announced at Town Hall. The mood was not victory. It was relief, with work clothes on. The camp still needed repairs. The animals still needed care. The old wrong had not become right simply because someone signed a document. But a door had opened. While Bend turned toward Hawthorne, Nathan's cabin turned noisier by the hour. Ranger grew stronger in leaps,
Sometimes literal and poorly aimed. He charged across the floor each morning, slid on the boards, crashed into chair legs, and came away convinced he had conquered furniture.
Daisy began trusting Hannah, then Rachel, then June, though she still treated the vacuum cleaner at Rachel's clinic as an enemy nation. Pip remained small, but his eyes cleared, his appetite sharpened, and his devotion to Nathan became complete. If Nathan moved from stove to sink, Pip followed. If Nathan sat, Pip climbed. If Nathan tried to tie his boots, Pip attacked the laces with such solemn focus that Nathan once lost 5 minutes to negotiation. Sage watched all of it with a patience that sometimes cracked into exasperation. One afternoon, Ranger tried to climb into the empty wood box. Sage stood, walked over, and nudged him out with her nose. Ranger immediately tried again. Sage looked at Nathan as if asking whether all sons were this exhausting. "I have no data," Nathan told her. "But he seems committed."
Hannah laughed from the floor where Daisy had finally placed both front paws in her lap. The sound filled the cabin and did not hurt the way Nathan expected. It hurt some, yes, but like light entering a room that had been closed too long. Rachel came by that evening for another check. She weighed Pip, listened to his chest, and pronounced him small but professionally stubborn. Nathan stood by the counter, arms folded. "Is that a diagnosis?" "A warning." Rachel packed her stethoscope, then looked at him. "The Rescue Trust wants to turn Hawthorne into an animal shelter. Small at first. Intake room, quarantine space, volunteer storage, maybe a little office." "Good." "They asked if you would help with repairs." "I already cleared snow." "That was one afternoon." "Two." She smiled. "Heroic." He looked toward the puppies. Pip had fallen asleep on his boot. "I can help." Rachel's expression softened. "Can you also let people help you?" The question was quieter than the others. Nathan looked out the window toward the dark river. The reflection of the stove moved in the glass orange and unsteady. "I do not know." "That is more honest than no." At Hawthorne, the repairs began before the sale paperwork had cooled. Volunteers tore out rotten boards, hauled trash, replaced broken windows, and marked unsafe areas for professionals. June brought sandwiches in boxes labeled for specific jobs because she believed hungry volunteers made crooked decisions. Mark worked after shifts, removing nails and carrying lumber with a seriousness that did not erase his guilt, but gave it somewhere useful to go. Hannah painted sample letters for a sign, though she changed the name 3 times before landing on Hawthorne Haven Animal Rescue. Nathan arrived one morning with tools in the bed of his truck and Sage in the passenger seat. She stepped into the clearing and stopped. The dining hall looked different already. The broken entrance had been framed. The corner where her puppies had nearly died was swept clean, not erased, but honored. Sage walked slowly to the porch. Nathan followed but did not crowd her. She sniffed the new boards, the old threshold, the place where snow no longer drifted inside. Then her tail moved, once, twice. A full sweep followed, broad and astonished, as if some part of her had been waiting to see whether a ruined home could become gentle again. Nathan felt something give inside him. Not break. Give. That night, Rachel called from the clinic. "We found a microchip record for Sage." Nathan sat straighter. "And?" "Registered to Megan Avery. No updated owner, no next of kin listed. Legally, we need a final notice period before adoption can be completed." Nathan looked across the cabin. Sage slept with Ranger tucked against her side, Daisy under her chin, and Pip between her front paws. "How long?" "Not long. But there is another question." He already knew. The silence told him. "The puppies can be adopted separately once cleared." Rachel's voice was gentle. "There will be families who want them." Nathan watched Pip twitch in sleep. Ranger's paw rested over Daisy's ear. Sage opened one eye and found him looking. The cabin settled around them, full of heat breath and the terrifying possibility of belonging. "I know," he said. But after the call ended, he sat awake long after the fire burned low, wondering whether love was still love, if fear made all the decisions. The week before Hawthorne Haven opened, Bend softened under a stretch of clear winter weather, the sort that made the mountains look close enough to touch and the snow crust sparkle under morning light. Nathan drove to the small cemetery near the old stone church on the east side of town with Hannah Brooks in the passenger seat and Sage sitting upright in the back like a silent chaperone. The cemetery road had been plowed, but snow lay deep between the headstones, rounding every name with white. They had found Megan Avery's grave through the church office, and a retired secretary who remembered Megan bringing Sage to a Christmas pageant one year because the children refused to perform unless the dog watched. Nathan parked near the iron gate. For a while, nobody moved. Hannah held a small bundle of dried lavender tied with string. She had insisted on bringing something because, as she explained, if Sage loved her, we should not come empty-handed. Nathan had not argued.
They walked together through the rows, Sage moving slowly at Nathan's side. When they reached the stone, the dog stopped before either human checked the name. Megan Claire Avery, beloved teacher, friend, and keeper of open doors. Sage lowered her head and sniffed the snow at the base of the marker. Then she sat. No command, no hesitation. The world seemed to go very quiet around her. Nathan removed his glove and brushed snow from the carved letters. He had never met Megan Avery, but the shape of her life had touched his now in strange and powerful ways. A woman who had rescued a young shepherd, built a camp for children carrying grief, and left behind love so strong that a dog returned to its ruins years later when she needed shelter. Hannah set the lavender against the stone. "Hi," she whispered, then looked embarrassed by her own voice. Nathan kept his eyes on the name. "I think she heard." Hannah glanced at Sage. "Do you think Sage misses her?" "Yes." The answer came too fast to be anything but true. Hannah nodded. "I miss my dad like that sometimes. Not every second. But then something happens, and it is like someone opens a door inside me, and there he is." Nathan's throat tightened. Cold air moved across the cemetery, smelling of pine stone and distant wood smoke. "Your dad talked about you every chance he got." Hannah looked up. "He did?" "Constantly. It was exhausting." Her mouth lifted. "What did he say?" Nathan leaned against the iron fence beside the grave, letting memory come without shoving it back into the dark. "He said you once tried to fix the toaster with a butter knife and scared your mother half to death." Hannah groaned. "I was 7. He said you drew horses on every notebook you owned. He said you asked hard questions and expected real answers." Nathan smiled faintly. "He said if anybody ever tried to lie to you, they should stretch first." Hannah laughed, then wiped at her face with her sleeve, pretending the cold had done it. Nathan looked at Megan's stone. Eli was the kind of man who made fear feel smaller. Not gone, just smaller. I thought after he died that if I stopped needing people, I could stop failing them. Did you fail him? The question was direct enough to hurt. Nathan took a long breath. I gave an order. It went bad. Was my dad the kind of person who only followed orders? Nathan looked at her. Eli's face came back grinning under dust, stubborn as a nail, telling Nathan to quit carrying every storm like he owned the weather. No. Then maybe he chose to. The cemetery held the sentence. Nathan did not answer because something in him had to sit down around it. Sage pressed her shoulder against his leg, steady and warm. After a long moment, Nathan crouched by Megan Avery's grave. I do not know if you meant for her to come back here, he said softly, feeling foolish and not caring. But she did. She saved her pups. She saved more than that. He looked at Sage. The dog's amber eyes met his old with memory, alive with trust.
If you are willing, I would like to give them a home. A breeze moved through the bare branches above them, shaking loose a fine dust of snow that glittered in the light. Hannah whispered, "I think that was a yes." Nathan stood, and for the first time in years, the ache in his chest did not feel like a locked room. It felt like a room with a window cracked open. The legal notice period ended 2 days later with no claimant. Rachel called Nathan to the clinic where adoption forms waited in a neat folder on the exam room counter. "Sage is clear," she said. "So are the puppies medically and legally. Ranger already has 3 adoption applications. Daisy has 2. Pip," she glanced at the little pup asleep against Nathan's wrist. "Pip has apparently filed one for you." Nathan looked down. Pip opened one eye, sighed, and went back to sleep. Rachel did not push. That was one of her gifts. She let silence do honest work. "You do not have to keep them all," she said. "A good home can be more than one house." Nathan watched Ranger tumble into a basket of clean towels, watched Daisy retreat behind Sage, then creep out again when Hannah offered a soft toy. Sage lay with her chin on her paws, but her eyes tracked every puppy, every breath. "I know." "Do you?" Rachel asked. He looked at her. There was no judgment in her face, only care, which was sometimes harder to stand. "I am not afraid of the work," he said. "I am afraid of—" The rest did not come neatly. It came as his hand settling over Pip's back, as a memory of Eli's folded flag, as Sage running through snow until strangers finally understood. Rachel finished nothing for him. Outside the clinic, volunteers were loading supplies for Hawthorne Haven's opening. June had commandeered 2 teenagers to carry blankets. Mark stood beside the sheriff's vehicle talking to Ray Dunn, who had come to help paint storage shelves, as part apology, part sentence he had given himself. The town was moving forward in small, useful motions. Nathan envied them. Motion had always been easier than choice. That evening, he took Sage and the puppies back to the cabin. Snow began falling after sunset, light and slow. The stove glowed, throwing amber across the floor. Ranger fell asleep upside down with one paw in the air. Daisy curled near Sage's belly. Pip climbed with great determination and very little grace into Nathan's lap. Sage rested her head on Nathan's boot. He sat there a long time, adoption folder unopened on the table. The cabin did not sound empty anymore. It sounded risky. Nails clicking, puppies breathing, Sage sighing in her sleep, the wind finding the corners of the roof. Nathan looked at the old photo of Eli tucked into the edge of a shelf, the one he had nearly put away 100 times and never had. "I do not know if I can do this," he said into the room. Pip shifted closer against his hand. Sage opened her eyes. There was no demand in them, only the same trust she had offered in the dining hall when she let him lift her pups from the cold. Nathan understood then that courage did not always feel like certainty. Sometimes it felt like a signature waiting for morning. Morning came to Bend, bright and cold, with a fresh layer of snow softening the streets and the Cascades shining white under a sky washed clean. At Hawthorne Camp, which was no longer only Hawthorne Camp, sunlight fell across a new wooden sign above the repaired porch. Hawthorne Haven Animal Rescue. Hannah Brooks had painted the letters in deep green, with one small paw print hidden inside the curve of the final word, because June said every serious sign deserved one secret bit of joy. The old dining hall smelled of sawdust, clean blankets, coffee, and new paint. Its broken windows had been replaced. The floor near the counter had been reinforced. In the corner, where 3 puppies had nearly died, Rachel had placed a small cedar bench with a brass plate that read, "For every life brave enough to ask for help." People arrived in boots and winter coats, carrying donated food, leashes, towels, crates,
and the awkward tenderness of a town trying to do better without making a speech out of it.
Mark Ellis stood near the entrance in uniform, directing traffic with a seriousness June found unnecessary and entertaining.
"You are waving them in like aircraft," she told him. "It is a parking lot. It is an active event. It is 12 cars and Ed's pickup." Mark lowered his hand. "Ed parks like weather." June considered that. "Fair." Ray Dunn came early and stayed near the storage shelves, stacking bags of food without asking anyone to praise him. His wife sat nearby with a thermos, smiling when nobody looked. Grant Whitaker did not attend. His company had paid fines, surrendered the property deal, and retreated into the kind of silence that follows public embarrassment. Some people wanted more punishment. Others wanted the story to end with anger. But Hawthorne Haven did not open as a monument to Grant's failure. It opened because a mother dog had refused to stop trying, and a town had eventually decided to answer. Nathan arrived late,
Which June said was rude, until she saw why.
His truck pulled into the clearing with Sage in the passenger seat and 3 puppies in a crate lined with a red blanket. Ranger stood with both front paws on the edge, greeting the world as if he had founded it. Daisy peered from behind his shoulder, cautious but curious. Pip sat bundled near the side, small and bright-eyed, wearing the expression of a creature who knew he would be carried if negotiations failed. Sage stepped down first. For a second she froze at the sight of the building. Too many memories lived there. Hunger, snow, fear, the smell of old wood and cold puppies. Nathan stood beside her without touching. He had learned that trust sometimes needed room to turn around. Sage sniffed the air. Children laughed inside. A bowl clinked. Someone opened a bag of kibble. The new shelter breezed around her, no longer abandoned, no longer silent. Her tail moved slowly, then wider. Hannah came onto the porch and knelt. "Hi, Sage."
The shepherd walked to her, lowered her head, and allowed the girl to press her cheek against sable fur. Nathan looked away for a moment, not because he was embarrassed, but because some sights asked for privacy, even in a crowd. The adoption papers were signed at Rachel's clinic an hour later. Rachel had insisted on doing it before the opening ceremony, partly for legal clarity, and partly because she knew Nathan might otherwise find a useful task and hide behind it until spring. The exam room was crowded. June stood by the sink. Hannah and Claire Brooks stood near the door. Mark leaned against the wall, pretending he had not come specifically to see the signatures. Sage lay on the floor with her puppies climbing over her front paws. Rachel placed the forms in front of Nathan. Sage, Ranger, Daisy, Pip. All 4. Nathan picked up the pen. His hand did not shake. That surprised him. The fear was still there somewhere, under the ribs, old and familiar, but it no longer had the wheel. He signed his name once, then again, then again, then again.
Rachel checked each page and stamped them with official satisfaction. "Congratulations," she said. "You now have one highly intelligent German shepherd, one fearless explorer, one cautious analyst, and one tiny supervisor." Pip sneezed from Nathan's boot. June wiped her eyes with a napkin and said, "Dust in here?" "There is no dust," Mark said. "There is emotional dust," June snapped. Hannah laughed. Sage lifted her head and looked at Nathan. He crouched and rested one hand against her neck. "Looks like you are stuck with me." Sage licked his chin once, quick and businesslike, then turned back to her pups as if affection had been handled and the schedule could continue. By afternoon, Hawthorne Haven was full of movement. Volunteers sorted supplies. Rachel led a tour of the quarantine room. Mark spoke briefly about reporting neglected animals and unsafe properties.
And this time he did not flinch when he mentioned his own mistake. "Sometimes doing better begins with admitting where we stopped short," he said. Sage did not stop short. We are here because she kept going. People clapped, not loudly at first, then with warmth. Hannah became the shelter's first junior volunteer, a title June wrote on a paper badge and taped crookedly to her coat. Ranger tried to eat the badge. Daisy met a quiet older woman who planned to help with shy rescues and immediately approved of her shoes. Pip slept through most of the event in Nathan's arms, which made several people whisper that he was fragile. Pip woke long enough to bite Nathan's zipper and prove otherwise. Near sunset, Nathan walked alone into the old dining hall corner. Sage followed. The cedar bench stood where he had found the puppies under torn cloth. He remembered the cold of their bodies against his chest, the terrible silence of Pip's first ride home, the way Sage had watched him, because trust was the only tool she had left. He touched the brass plate. Rachel came to the doorway but did not enter. "You all right?" Nathan looked at Sage. "Getting there." She smiled softly. "That counts." Night settled gently over the forest by the time Nathan drove home. Snow began falling again, not as a threat this time, but as a quiet blessing over the road. At the cabin, he fed the dogs, stacked wood, and lit the stove. Ranger collapsed beside the hearth after a day of public service. Daisy tucked herself under the edge of Sage's body. Pip climbed into Nathan's lap, turned in 2 clumsy circles, and slept with his chin on Nathan's wrist. Sage lay across the doorway for a while, guarding out of habit, then rose and came to sit beside Nathan. Her head rested against his knee. The cabin was no longer silent. It clicked, breathed, snored, shifted, and occasionally squeaked when Ranger dreamed of battles with towels. Nathan looked at the photo of Eli on the shelf. "House sounds different now," he said quietly. The words did not break him. They opened something. "You would have liked them." The stove warmed the room. Outside, the river moved under ice, patient and unseen. Nathan set his hand on Sage's head, feeling the steady life beneath his palm. He had thought rescue meant pulling someone else from danger. Now he understood it could move both ways. Sometimes you follow a dog into a storm to save 3 small lives, and sometimes those lives follow you home, carrying your heart back, piece by piece, until you recognize it again. In the soft light of the cabin, with 4 shepherds sleeping around him and snow falling beyond the glass, Nathan Pierce finally let himself stay. Sometimes God sends help in a form we do not expect. It may not arrive with thunder or a clear sign in the sky. It may arrive as a tired dog at the door, a neighbor who needs kindness, a child with a memory, or a small life asking us to care again. Nathan thought he was only saving Sage and her puppies, but love has a holy way of rescuing the rescuer too. When we open our hearts, even after grief, God can bring warmth back into rooms we thought would stay empty forever. If this story touched your heart, comment Amen and share it with someone who needs hope today. May we all notice the quiet cries for help around us. May we answer with courage, and may God bless your home with peace, compassion, and the gentle reminder that love can return.